of the downtown. I have lived downtown since 1999. So I've been down here a lot. I see a lot down here. I worked downtown for a number of years, 11 years, until the business I worked at moved out of the downtown for various reasons and downsized, and now I work in Springfield. I came here tonight to talk about the use of cameras in the downtown. I am 100% for the use of cameras in the downtown. We have a lot of problems in the downtown, and there are many instances where I wish there had been a camera. I wish there had been a camera a few years ago the night a gentleman in a pickup truck threw a beer bottle out the window at me because I was wearing a headscarf yelling, "Go home, you effing Muslim." I didn't get a good look at his truck because I was too busy ducking a beer bottle coming at me. I'm not a Muslim. I had a headscarf on because that's the way my Polish Catholic grandmother taught me to tie a scarf on your head when it's cold out, and that's what I did. I would also have liked to have a camera down here when my bike got stolen, which was my only transportation, and at my income level, I will never be able to replace that. And the little rent-a-bikes have the wrong kind of handlebars for me to use, so I'm just out of luck where that's concerned. I would like to have had a camera on when various travelers have asked me for money, and when I've said no, got irate and made threats upon me, and there's several times I've had to run because of the kind of threats they were making and the violence that they were threatening me with for not giving them money. I don't have spare change. I live in HUD housing. I have cameras on me all the time. You know, we have a camera when we come in the door. There's a camera in the elevator. There's a camera in the laundry room. There's cameras in the hallways. There's cameras on us all the time in the building for our safety. I'm on camera when I take the bus. You know, every time I take the bus, there's cameras, and I'm sure the two ladies assaulted on the bus were happy there was a camera on there so they could catch the assailant. I know Eugene, and you're going to hear a lot of Big Brother watching you. All I got to say to that is if they have a smartphone on them, they carry Big Brother with them 24/7. And so to scoff about a camera that is seen and that you can avoid, you know, is ridiculous when they have a smartphone that is tracking their every single move and totally subject to any corporation to buy and sell that information. I feel safer knowing that there are going to be cameras in the downtown to record some of this stuff. I can't always give a good description. I have often seen drug dealers in the parks, and maybe I can get a good description who walked off the park blocks with two young boys in tow telling them how they were a connected traveler who knew all the drug houses and was going to take them to one. But I couldn't always give an adequate description. So I think a camera would be very, very helpful in these instances. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Concludes public comments.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. So we'll move on to commissioner comments, but before I do, I wanted to welcome
Yes.
Joel, who is now representing the Human Rights Commission on the commission. Welcome to joining us. We appreciate always having input from the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you.
Joel. With that, we'll go around the table for commissioner comments, and Jennifer, can I start with you, and we'll
Sure.
just work around the table there?
Yeah, I don't have any specific comments, but I'm sorry I'm late.
I don't have any comments. Our Civilian Review Board is not meeting this month.
I'll just say thank you for meeting down here at Harris Hall. I'm sure it took some extra effort to organize a meeting down here, and we can't have our snacks during our meeting. That you guys don't get a dinner during anyway. Maybe with our new chief, we can petition for a proper meal at our meetings going forward. But yeah, I think having public comment from Ms. Gladen, who lives in the downtown and does come and take opportunity to speak to City Council when she gets the opportunity, is a nice example of how moving the police commission meeting to another location has given another part of the community an opportunity to speak to this body. So I thank you for coming, Kimberly. So I think it's a great example of even though it takes effort and we worry about unintended consequences of people coming to the wrong location, that, you know, I think there are really good reasons to try to move the meeting every once in a while.
Thank you, Chair, for introducing myself. I know some of you around the table, we've had the chance to meet before. Some of you will get to know each other as the year goes by. I'm currently Vice Chair of the Human Rights Commission for the City of Eugene, but we just had elections at our last meeting, so starting here in about a week or so, I'll be the Chair of the Human Rights Commission. Edward served previously as a liaison to the Police Commission, so we thought it would be appropriate to continue the tradition of having the Chair serve as that liaison position. So I look forward to working with you, and thanks for the work you do.
I'd just like to say thank you for the training orientation that we went over earlier this week.
I'd just like to thank Ms. Layden for his comments. You're preaching to at least some of the choir here. Not everybody, but some of it. Some of us would like to see cameras not everywhere, but in some particularly problematic places. And then well advertised so that people aren't having their privacy intruded on, but are aware of it to deter crime, and when it's not, people to help prosecute it. I think we'll continue sending up the foul balloon and perhaps eventually get there. But thank you for your comments. It really does help.
Yes, I don't know if this is the time or not, but I remember that the city council, perhaps Claire can give me the numbers. Was it a close vote about the cameras? Was it?
So
or
I don't
way off
believe that
the-
we ever took a formal vote, because it wouldn't necessarily be up to city council.
Oh, okay.
To decide if, the chief and the city manager decided they
I
want to
see.
put those in, they have the authority to do that. So we've had a discussion about it.
Right.
But we didn't take a formal vote one way or the other. So I think that was when Chief Kearns was still here, so.
Okay.
I have been approached twice this last month, with complaints about the downtown experience, both by young women. One was walking on Broadway, and one was in line at a food cart when they were accosted by street persons, I guess you'd say, men, who in both cases it sounds like they proved pretty persistent, and both women seem to be frightened and disturbed by the experience. It seems to me this kind of thing is a good argument for cameras downtown, or for some kind of steadier supervision. So that's all.
Chief?
I think I'll wait for my report. Joel's great getting to know you at the orientation we had
Yeah, it was
earlier this
nice.
week, and Sean, great getting to know you a little bit better, so appreciate the time that you spent this week getting to know us and going through the packet and everything. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. One more thing you wanted to say, Joel? Sure.
Please, thank you for indulging me. I wanted to welcome Chief Skinner. I haven't had a chance to see you since our interview process, so I've been meaning to say thank you and welcome to the city of Eugene. I'm sure you've gotten to know these folks at the table, but I know the Human Rights Commission was really excited about your selection. I wanted to share it with you, with other commissioners here. That
Thank you. Yeah.
You were our number one choice.
Yeah, it's gonna be some really good work together.
Thank you. Well, I just want to welcome everybody again. I appreciate it. It's nice to see a nice full table here of all the commissioners, and so hopefully we'll have some good discussion as we go through some good topics today. Thank you. With that, we'll go to the review and approve of May's minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the minutes?
Very good.
No comments, and then look for a motion.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, first and second, any other discussion? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I'll abstain, having not been present.
I'll abstain as well.
I also have to abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Got those? Okay, perfect. With that, I will invite Captain Mason and Dee to come up to the
comfortable? No, you guys can sit right here. Yeah.
You sure? We're at
Yes,
the
I'm
end
sure.
of the table.
Captain, sit down.
With authority.
We can just squeeze you in here. You're right there.
He just
You
wants
will
out of
squeeze
the
in.
limelight.
Hi. Hello. Good to see you all again. It's been a while. This is Cindy Coleman. For those that don't know, I'm Captain Carolyn Mason. Hello. And they gave me a pointer. You be the pointer person. We're going to tag team the, I guess it's going to be the 2017 IA annual report. And I believe you were already provided a robust copy of it. This will be a condensed version. So to start off with, IA comprised of Cindy, who's our, I call her the IA queen because she's been with us since 2001. And she's our continuity in all the changes that happen in IA. Jason Barrett, as you know, is our IA investigator. Rick Weber's program coordinator, and Angie San Miguel, who is attending her 8th grade graduation of her son, is not here, and I got tapped, so. Overview quickly, I'm not going to read all of them. We're going to go through a majority of these pretty quickly, and if you guys have questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them. Let's start with the overview of the IA stats. We've provided you with 3 years comparison. Our data does go back to 2014, but it gets clunky when we start showing the history. So an IA investigation is obviously a serious allegation of misconduct, and those are assigned to our IA investigators. We also do incident reviews, which are preliminary looks at complaints that come in to determine whether or not they should be classified as an allegation or whether they go to an inquiry or service complaint or possibly a policy complaint. And our numbers here, you can see we've decreased in 2017, and I couldn't tell you why. Maybe people are just really used to the auditor's office now. So let's talk about allegations of misconduct. And as I said, these are the more serious allegations of misconduct. We are lucky this year. We had a total of 26 allegations. I believe those are down from previous years. And of those 26, this is how we ranked them out by subclass. Performance is by far the largest category, followed by conduct.
And I'll just add that these are classified by the auditor. All complaints are classified by the auditor.
So our sustained complaint rates are running at about, I say 50%, but I think Cindy's got the stats down here at about 65% because she's crunching numbers. But you can see under the year or above the year column are the internal complaints generated internally by police department employees. And then the blue column is external complaints. And to the right of that is a sustained rate. So roughly, like I said, 65% were internally generated and 54% were, of those internally generated, 54% were sustained with corrective action. Any questions about these as we move on? I don't want to have to save everything for the end. So if you have a question about a slide or topic, go ahead and chime in.
A comment about it, I think that it's encouraging that 65% were internally generated. That's up from when it, several years ago. So see that as a positive thing.
I think Blue Team has made a difference with that in our stats.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because with Blue Team, we require the supervisors to enter any kind of complaint at intake, and as well as if they are made aware of or observe something themselves, then they have the obligation to do that. So we're catching more of that stuff and dealing with it.
Good.
But we're slightly down from the last 2 years as well, like by one each year.
I had one more question.
Okay.
What would be performance? What would be classified as performance versus conduct?
So, Cindy, do you want to touch that when you deal with them more daily?
To be classified as performance and go to an IA investigation, it's going to be more serious performance issues or performance issues that have, with an employee that has had a reoccurring history of performance issues that were result in termination or some sort of discipline if it's sustained. So it's more serious performance, not routine performance. That's typically going to be classified as a service complaint and assigned to a supervisor to investigate and handle directly.
Can you think of 1101 and give us some examples of what a performance and conduct? I can tell you right now, if you call somebody a swear word, that's going to get you one. For certain misappropriate interactions with people, most generally are the conduct. Performance, I'm just like
the performance, like I said, it's got to be something either serious enough in a one-time event, a serious performance discrepancy, or it could be just this employee has gone through coaching, documented counseling, maybe even a work plan, and now they're not those
responding. Yeah.
So it could potentially lead to discipline, or it could be a performance issue that needs an IA investigation to really get all the facts around it. So.
Okay. So then what's the difference between conduct and courtesy?
A courtesy, a profanity situation would actually be classified as courtesy rather than conduct.
So conduct would be a little more serious.
Usually.
Conduct is like unbecoming conduct.
So it's kind of a three-tiered system, kind of seriousness.
If you saw our code of conduct policy,
it has to be in there.
It's like 20 pages.
So like, for instance, performance might be in the course of your duty, if you do something that is an egregious officer safety issue and puts other people in harm's way, that is a serious performance issue. Conduct is generally things that you do where you misuse your authority for whatever purpose. And then the courtesy is in the normal course of our duty, as the frustrations rise, things come out of our mouths, or we do certain things that are just really discourteous to the customers we're serving. So that, in my mind, that kind of seems to be kind of that tiered approach to what's going on.
Thank you.
Performance could also be like report writing.
That's what I was going to ask.
Errors, misrepresenting
You did something
facts,
wrong.
or
Incomplete reports.
or not doing it appropriately. Yes. Okay. Wow, that is such a big screen. We go from the little one in the Chiefs conference room to this one. It's imposing. So the case dispositions on our 26 allegations are as follows. We have the 3 dismissed at intake. Sometimes those can be because of timeliness or any other factor that the auditor has to use for that. What is the employee is no longer active? Right. So an allegation may have came in and the employee left employment before the allegation was adjudicated. Insufficient evidence is obviously we can't flip a coin to make a decision. Sustained, obviously we have 14 of those. 1 unfounded, 3 within policy, and 2 not adjudicated. And I think the next slide will talk about it, but yes, it will. Any questions on the adjudications? So allegations by finding, although we only had 26 IA cases, those are the blue folders in particular, we had 37 different allegations. So on occasion, a single blue folder can have more than 1 allegation. Does that make sense?
Or more than 1 employee.
Right, or more than 1 employee. And that's just another way of looking at the same slide we looked at. So then we break them down even further by subclass, and you can see the adjudication by use of force, performance, courtesy, constitutional rights, and conduct. So incident reviews are preliminary investigations that that the auditor classifies, and those are assigned typically to our IA sergeant. They're basically, we call them a quick look or a peek at what we really have to determine if there's merit to the complaint and whether or not it should be assigned as an IA investigation or whether or not it would go to policy, any one of the others, or even dismissed. Sometimes with incident reviews, if there's not enough to assign them to another category, then they can be closed out in this classification.
So all of the ones here that show incident review, that represents all the ones that were in fact closed out as an incident review. The sergeant did a preliminary investigation, reported his findings to the auditor, and the auditor was comfortable closing it out with any further investigation required. And these are further broken down by subclass to give us a better idea of the nature of the complaints that are represented in these. And again, performance is leading the charge.
Cindy, you want to touch on supervisor actions?
Sure. Supervisor actions are the body of complaints that come in that the auditor further classifies or subclassifies as either service complaints, inquiries, or policy complaints. And these most typically are assigned to the employee's immediate supervisor for investigation, assessment, follow-up with the complainant and the employee, and closing out.
Right, so these again are not rising to the level of serious misconduct, but could result in a coaching or may not result in anything if no inappropriate actions were taken. So of those numbers, we didn't have that, the total numbers. Oh, I do, right here. We processed 276 service complaints, policy complaints, and inquiries in 2017, and they were classified as follows. The service complaints were 50% of them, 11% service or policy complaint, and then 39% inquiry. And inquiries are basically people calling up and saying, well, I don't understand why you do this. Or this happened to me, why? And then usually somebody, a sergeant, can explain to them our processes, and they're happy and satisfied with that. Policy complaints, we get a lot about those about camping, and I think the favorite is crash reports. People are unhappy with our policy about not taking crash reports without injury or monitor the level of monetary damage. So again, just usually a conversation with the individual explaining our policy, taking note that, whether they like it or not, and passing the information on.
Captain, so in supervisor's actions, if a supervisor were to notice one of these things, would these go into the system, or is that just a coaching that the supervisor does and maybe documents it in there without going through the complaint process? Am I asking that question right? Does that make sense?
Yes. This system was not designed to track every routine supervisory action that the supervisor takes on a routine basis with their employee. Employees may need coaching, and that is something that might be documented in another way in a supervisor working file. However, if it's a citizen complaint that they've received in the field that hasn't started with the auditor, and they're in the field and they get called to a scene and a citizen makes a complaint, or even if it's a service level complaint, what we would expect them to do if they can is investigate it, make an assessment, let the reporting party know what their assessment is, and do a blue team entry, document that, and then enter it in, and we would recommend that it be closed out as resolved. And that is kind of a win-win for everyone. If it is, they get that same complaint and it's it seems like it's a serious allegation of misconduct, it's going to be entered in, looked at by the auditor, and probably assigned to an IA investigator. But the routine performance issues that they deal with, no, we would not expect them to put them in if they're internally generated unless they're serious.
So this is mainly a third party tracking, making sure that
Right.
complaints are from third parties.
Extra complaints. So the next slide is we have the comparison in the 3 years. Inquiries, policy complaints, and service complaints. And you can see we're trending down in almost all of them. I think part of it too is Mark's more familiar with adding the inquiry and the supervisor intake or So how he's been using his classification abilities has kind of helped us change how the numbers are relating as well.
We also changed the classification system.
Right. We added the incident review,
Right,
which
that's
is
one.
really, we added that in 2016, and that has really helped get that additional look that could potentially still result in a reclass upwards to an allegation of misconduct. But it has really saved a lot in, we've been able to get the appropriate amount of investigation and answers to our questions without a full IA in many cases.
I have a question for you. So it's related to this slide and then the comments after the next slide and kind of throughout the presentation. When we're comparing year over year in the last 3 years, I always think of what are we trying to do? Like, do we use benchmark to say, well, we're trending in the right direction, this is what our goal is. We should be at, 130 of these complaints or whatever, like, and maybe we look at other agencies, like, are we, doing good, comparably speaking? I mean, I don't know, like, what we're measuring as the benchmark, so I just throw that out as a question.
I don't know that we can compare against other agencies because we have an auditor system that most agencies in our state alone don't have. I think Portland might be the most robust.
Yeah.
And of course, they're larger and more political as well. So I don't know that comparison agency to agency is a fair.
Well, I'm throwing it out there as a collective of
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
somehow,
Yeah.
it seems like we should establish some
But yeah,
benchmark that
what's our
seems
goal?
reasonable.
Yeah, where are we going?
Right.
I don't know that, in my time at least, that we've ever really shot. My goal would be 0. Is that realistic?
No,
I don't know what
no.
a realistic number really looks like, but I think as we
Yes.
are able to look at the data over a period of time, then we're better able to go, what's an average, and where can we really make an effect? And for me, having worked in IA for 6 years, in one form or another, I think you can take a look at. Wow, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I just think it's
Oh,
something
so-
to note that
Yeah.
should be worth
But
looking at, maybe.
The biggest thing that I think that I took away from working in there was that we started implementing.
Routine?
No, it's the review after the case is closed. So
Oh, right.
the training points, the takeaways from these is like, how do we address this in training or supervisor training so that we're not repeating these
Yeah, right.
same mistakes?
That's
I mean,
great.
there's going to be some things that happen.
Yeah.
We can't make them all go away, but there's some common themes that we can go, you got to be nice to people, you can't cuss at them, and we can reinforce that type of training consistently, and or our use of force training, so that we are not doing those things that are just obvious no-brainers. And for me, that was the goal when I was there, and still is to re-emphasize those lessons learned from these cases so that we're not just beating our heads on the wall. But do I have a number that I'm shooting for? No. But it's a good piece of information, maybe I'll think about it.
I would have to think that at a certain extent, if the numbers start to rapidly go down, it could indicate that people don't assume you're going to do anything. So at a certain level, you seeing that people are complaining means that they think you're actually going to take their complaints seriously.
Right.
So a 0 might actually be a negative, might be a bad thing.
Yeah, that's a good
I would
point.
agree.
I know when I was working in IA, there were 2 of us, Lieutenant Nat now, and I can recall a time where we each had 10 blue folders on our desk at one time during the summer. So that was 20 blue folders. If last year we had a total of 26,
Yeah.
we've decreased
good.
in our allegations. Our serious misconduct has decreased. And I don't think that that's people not reporting it. I think we have a really robust reporting system.
Right.
People report a lot of things. I think body cameras really made an impact last year, but I'm not able to extrapolate that information from here.
Yeah.
Because we've had 2 IA investigators since 2004, and last year I cut one. I gave him back to patrol. I said, I don't have enough work. Sorry. Which
Yeah.
was a good thing.
Well, I definitely would say 0 is way unrealistic. And so somewhere between 0
I'd
and,
like a real 0.
like, maybe something to measure or just be thinking about anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, yeah, just, I think trying to set any kind of numerical goal is, I think would be a fallacy. I mean, how do you come up with that number? I think trends
Right.
would be what you would want to look at, right?
Or a range. I mean, things are going to ebb and flow.
Well, it's just that it is so subjective, all of the reasons that any of these complaints are made, internal or external, that trying to set yourself up to say we're, gonna have only, 100 next year. But if your goal is a trend,
Right.
to trend, and then I also think how quickly they're resolved, could be
right.
another benchmark.
Right, absolutely.
Because that speaks to, how seriously they're being taken, customer service, those kinds of things. So I think thinking about benchmarks in those ways would make more sense to me. And then around things like service complaints or courtesy, if the chief or the department decided there was a particular initiative, you could focus on an employee initiative around a specific goal of reducing those complaints by reinforcing to everyone, the importance of courtesy and having training around it. So there are some things you can do to try to affect those numbers in those ways.
I wanted to put up, you remember OSHA signs, they used to say so many days
Exactly.
accident-free?
Yeah.
I wanted to put up so many days IA-free. But, yeah, I don't think I can do that one. Because then somebody'd be like, who got it?
Yeah.
We have a couple questions. Scott wants to ask a couple, and I have Sean, I have you, and I want a couple too, so go ahead.
Thanks. As that topic of the data is being brought up and discussed, are these numbers updated every month on some sort of chart, dashboard, what have you?
Cindy, our database does track, this is annual statistics, but our database can give us live data, live trends, everything from the numbers of complaints, how they're classified, individual employees. So yeah, we have access to all of that, live.
Now I'm just gonna think out loud here. It's something that's been troubling me for the last few months, and as we review policies, we don't have actual cases or numbers of violations of the policy in real time as we're reviewing those policies. So when we review them in the spiritual content of what we're trying to accomplish, but where are the sticking points in the policy that are being violated, and maybe we have violations in a repetitive manner in certain areas, that would focus our conversation as a police commission around reviewing the policy and making recommendations for changes and using those data-driven decisions, decision-making to really attack those pieces there. Something I've been thinking about, and if the data is there, I might just ask every now and then as we have a policy that impacts service, code of conduct, what have you, where we could get some data. And Steve, you do a great job of telling us what's happened there. It's just sometimes maybe the case that would be relevant was discussed 6 months before the policy, and so sometimes it's hard to remember those things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that we can definitely share numerical data. I don't know that we can share the personnel records, obviously.
No,
Steve
not
can.
anything like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sean,
So I assume that 2015 is when we started tracking this?
Our data goes back to 2000. But over that period of time, what we track and exactly how we've tracked it and has fluctuated quite a bit. But our database goes back to 2000.
Have we used IA Pro
Since 2008. So we have 10 years in our current robust database.
And as we look at hiring additional officers, or, each year we have different numbers of interactions, do we have this data corrected for numbers of officers and numbers of interactions? Because otherwise if you have more interactions, you're probably going to have more complaints, just because there's more opportunity for people to complain.
Right, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure how we would represent that, though.
Right, this database does not talk to our HR databases that have the actual numbers of officers that are, we have the FTE, but, that even changes from how many are actually on the streets. So no, we don't have that interface. One thing I wanted to add to what Captain Mason had mentioned earlier about the lessons learned, one of the things that we look for as well sometimes is we do update policies sometimes based on an IA case. We recognize that either the policy must not have been clear enough, or didn't clearly set out the expectations. So it's one of the things that we look at routinely with IA cases.
And
Is
sometimes
training
new policies get created as well.
And yes.
So I'm Claire in the chair. I have myself in the queue, and then I have Claire. So the one thing I'm going to take this kind of along this same line that we're talking about, but as we see service complaints, and we'll do the car accident one. I mean, if year over year we still see that people are complaining that we're not responding to something. I mean, I would hope that we would then address that and say, what do we need to do staffing wise? Because that sounds like something the city wants, the citizens of the city want to have happen. And so I think some of this data needs to be pushed up to that level and not just look at it that, well, it's a complaint we talked about and we because I think these are the things that we need to look at as we're talking about, trying to increase the force or trying to build that I think these are the things, just like when we looked at how many calls are not being answered on a daily basis. Well, and also we're getting, people are calling back and complaining that nobody came out for my auto accident. And so I think we need to think about, service levels for that and in the future use this data to do that.
That's a good point.
Because
we get a lot too that aren't just the vehicles, but you took 5 hours to come to my burglary.
Right.
So I think you're right though that can help us with that metric.
Claire?
I'm going to disagree a little bit with you, Bill. I do think sometimes people have an unrealistic expectation of what their police department can and should do for them, and so they might expect that anytime there's a fender bender, they get to have a police report about it, and in terms of city resources, that's just unrealistic and maybe not where you want your tax dollars to be spent. So I think we do need to kind of think about that. We get complaints about what the county's doing. We get complaints about what LTD is doing, but we can't respond to all of those complaints because it's unreasonable for people to expect us to. So I think we just want to we'd want to think carefully about, people are complaining about this a lot, therefore we should be doing it, correlation. In terms of the connecting the data to, how many officers are being deployed or how many contacts there are, your database may not be able to connect those, but we do have data about calls for service, whether they're self-initiated calls or calls that are put in, how many of those calls are responded to. So there could be a way, and I don't know if it would be appropriate for your office or the police auditor's office to do that. I saw Leah kind of raise her hand. Yeah. So I think we can dig a little bit deeper into those things. And then in terms of the policy question, so I think what Scott was suggesting, that because this body has reviewed specific policies in the past, that if you did see that a policy was tripping officers up, this body would love to know that, and if practical or possible, have some input on, because we get down to where the commas are in your policy language. So those were my comments.
Good. Okay. You can.
And then to the last slide on, I think we were doing comparisons, service complaints by type. So you can see the service level is one of those. That's the response times and or lack of response in some cases. Use of force is very minimal. Performance, again, is our biggest one. That's, they didn't do a thorough investigation. They didn't talk to witnesses. All of those types. All right. So that's pretty much the IA side of the house. We have included some data on vehicle crashes, pursuits, use of force, which we also track. So if you have anything else on the IA side, now would be a good time question period. Okay.
It
We
looks
have
like,
one. We have Joel.
Oh, okay, Joel.
There was, towards the beginning of your presentation, there was a figure it was on incident reviews, had a 9% for discrimination. Could you elaborate on exactly what that entails?
so what this means is, the complaint comes in, and when the complaint comes in, the auditor has determined, the classification of incident review. The body of the complaint might otherwise be an allegation of misconduct, but rather than the auditor deciding to launch it immediately into an allegation of misconduct on, for example, bias-based policing or something that might come in that way, he would classify it as an incident review. It'd get assigned to the IA investigator. They would look at all available information to get the info, and then report that back to the auditor. And by the way, this is really any investigative step short of interviewing the named employee. So if there's a way to talk to witness employees, other witnesses, reviewing in-car video, body-worn camera, police reports, CAD records, whatever might be relevant for that particular complaint, the IA investigator can do all those things with the exception of talking to the named employee. And then report the findings back to the auditor and the IA lieutenant. And if the auditor is satisfied that that level of investigation answers the questions, he will determine that it can be closed out as an incident review. So we'll still have an investigative report. It just won't have the full IA report that goes, that's fully investigated, adjudicated, up all the way to the chief and back. So those discrimination ones are ones that the auditor has decided that best describes the type of complaint. So it could be a complaint of bias-based policing.
Great, thank you.
Vehicle crashes. So yesterday I was at EVOC and we got to purposefully
What's EVOC?
crash into one another. Emergency vehicle operations. I call it crashing, but we were doing police intervention techniques, PITs, so where you spin a car out. Sometimes that results in damage and they end up here. But not in training. Training doesn't count. So again, we've got a 3-year comparison of vehicle crashes, and in this year, 2017, we had 67, which was a pretty good jump and a little bit of an increase. Of those 67, 32 incidents, or 48%, were found to be at fault. So that's not necessarily great. That's why we do EVOC training. And actually, we'll see in some of the slides, because this just got repeated to me yesterday during the training, running into fixed objects, either going forward or backwards, seems to be our biggest problem. And having not driven one of those SUVs in a couple of years, I can see why. Even if you're a big person, it's really hard to see out of those cars. But let's look at the data.
Do you have backup cam?
There is a backup camera.
Backup cam?
Right. Yeah. But the problem with those SUVs is the A and B pillars
You need
and
more
the
cam.
height right there, and also in the rear. And you can't, in the old days, you could turn around and you could actually see out of the car. You cannot see out of those vehicles. But we'll talk more about it. The training is designed to reduce these numbers. 35 of the incidents were determined not to be at fault, and included 10 incidents that were identified to be the results of damage by citizens.
Non-crash.
Right, so them scratching our cars
Or throwing a rock at the car, or one thing that's important to know is these stats are not just pure vehicle crashes or accidents. This is, we're tracking all vehicle damage, regardless of how it was caused.
And sometimes we come back to our car and we find it damaged.
You said that 48% is a little high. Like, do you have in your mind, sorry, I like data, it helps inform decisions, but like, like some basis of why you think that's high? I mean, what would you like to see that number be? And don't say 0, because that's not realistic.
Put me on the spot. Well, I don't have the actual data to compare and look at the previous years of what the actual breakdown were. I'm just saying that in 15, we were at 53. We climbed to 59 in 2016, and then we jumped up eight more
But the
collisions.
48% at fault you feel is a bit high.
I would like to see it be a lot lower.
Yeah.
Maybe if I put it, I'd have to go look at I think this one I could put a number on that we would want to shoot for, what a reasonableness is, or looking at the actual reasons why people collided. I mean, I can think of a few off the top of my head, which are just operator error, and had they slowed down and breathed, or maybe not been looking at their MDT, they wouldn't have hit the curb and popped the tire and whatnot. Those are the ones that we can impact. No pun intended. And so this was a new one Cindy just told me about. We broke it down by patrol and investigations and also cahoots, and then within those categories we included sworn and professional staff. So it's across the board, but you can see the sworn are by far the majority of our cops driving. The most amount of miles.
And your volunteers who also drive around in department vehicles?
Where are they going to be covered under investigative professionals, or
Or are they just not reflected there?
This is where the accidents happened last year.
So I guess we can say we had no volunteers have a collision?
Well, unless you call cahoots.
No, cahoots is a paid contractor. They are not volunteering.
They're not employees, they're not volunteers, so. But we do track them because they're driving our vehicle.
Right.
And we do track the volunteers, so obviously seniors on patrol and all
Yeah,
of those
they're
other
doing
folks
good.
are doing great.
Yeah, good
Maybe they should give the drivers training.
Slow down.
2 words.
And again, you can see the number of miles we're driving every year. We
Yeah.
started doing this a few years ago, and it's just
Right.
amazing how many miles we put on our vehicles. So vehicle pursuits are always a fun topic at the PD. And we keep getting a little bit, I won't say better, because I think when a pursuit is initiated, as long as it's within policy, it's warranted. And we've really worked hard to narrow those down to the real circumstances that we want to have them employed. So when pursuits were initiated last year, like I said, we had 7? 6. I thought it was 6. I can't give you specifics on what the circumstances were off the top of my head, but agency assist, so that would be Springfield or the county or even OSP having a pursuit come in, and we joined because of a hit and run, probable cause situation, a reckless driving situation, and a wanted subject. And this one, I would say, we're getting into the range that we like to see. Like I said, I can't say if we had 10 felonious bad guys out there that needed to be stopped, then I would want 10 pursuits. So I can't limit and say, I only want 5 pursuits this year. It's going to be warranted on the circumstances. Yeah.
I agree with that totally. I will say I really am pleased with the revisions we made in 14, given the level of risk to the public,
Right.
where you can break it off and you know who they are and where they are and go get them later, narrowing the scope of when you can and should.
Right.
I greatly
Not pushing
appreciate
people into
But you're right.
circumstances.
Sometimes you have to, so
Yeah.
I get it.
So those circumstances were a little less last year with 6. Our use of force is up next. Any questions on vehicle pursuits? Okay. In 2017, we had 230 use of force incidents, and that can be anything from pepper spray, taser, not a control hold, but a focus blow, that's like a strike or a knee to the body part.
Takedown.
Taser point.
If there's injuries.
Yeah, a takedown if there were injuries. Lots of reportable levels of force that go into this. My notes say that we have 230 incidents using 313 officers, and I kind of went, we don't have 313 cops, but we know that one incident can result in multiple uses of forces by several officers, or over the course of a year, you can have one officer have multiple uses of forces in different incidents. So all of the uses of forces are reviewed by the chain of command. They're entered into blue team by the supervisors at the time in the field or shortly thereafter. They get routed through the chain, and IA gets to take a look at them, as well as our defensive tactics instructors. We found...
And the auditor.
And the auditor's office. We found that 3 particular incidents led to the use of force, and that was active resistance. So that's someone struggling to pull away or flee, or attempting to flee, and ominous resistance, which is threatening behavior that is likely to occur. Taking a fighting stance, saying, I'm going to do something bad to you, is one example. 87% of these incidents resulted in arrest, and our average age of offender was 36. I liked extrapolating this data because this is something I can give to our DT team and say, if you encounter these situations, you're likely to end up using force, so this is where you either need to deploy tactical or your de-escalation techniques or bring in more people or whatever. And I would say that if you're going to question me about the incidents of arrest, sometimes those folks go to the hospital. I was going to call the JU, but they go in for a psych eval or some other place. Sometimes they get released.
Behavioral health unit is its formal title.
But we don't take them there. We take them to the ER. But yeah. Okay. So injury-wise, number of officers injured increased 30%. And an injury equals a scratch. It can be a physical, visible injury, or it can be a bruise, or it can be a broken bone, or something more significant. Oftentimes, they listed more than one injury. The most common was an abrasion. 11 of the cases resulted in a workman's comp claim. And offenders are only injured 28% of the time. Again, the same criteria for listing an injury. Most often it's abrasions, lacerations, or a taser puncture. And occasionally they are taken to the hospital for evaluation if their wound is significant enough. And usually that's most likely a significant complaint of pain, sometimes a complaint of breathing difficulty or chest pain, or they have a laceration that needs to be looked at before the jail would accept them.
I think we have a couple questions.
Okay.
Any commonalities among the more serious lost time injuries in those 11?
I don't have the data, but we do get a risk report monthly. I just looked at one, and then at the end of the year, we do kind of look at total cost. I don't know, was that included? Did we take that out this year?
Well,
We used to.
It's some very high-level information is in there.
Was it included in their packet?
No,
we
it's
very
just,
high
it's
level.
mostly, for educational use for the officers going forward. Hey, look, one, you have effectiveness stuff on different types of use of force, which was sort of eye-opening to me about the comparative low lack of effectiveness of the taser, mostly because you don't get
Right,
both.
clothing.
Or clothing, or whatever. But also, if we have, just for feedback to the officers, think about when you are about to use this type of this force.
Right.
This is the injury that we see most when you do that.
And
it's useful.
We've addressed that over the last couple of years through defensive tactics, because a lot of times, mostly the men like to do the face punch, and oftentimes it doesn't work out well for the person receiving it, but the officers, we've had a few with broken hands, which takes them out for quite a while, and then obviously can affect their career opportunities.
And even the effectiveness of it isn't that great.
Sometimes, yeah, it's not.
Right.
So,
I had
One more
question.
I'm sorry.
Going back to the ominous, the threatening behavior, my understanding is that every use of force is reviewed by someone, I'm not sure who.
Okay.
And then we look at ways that could have been de-escalated. 'Cause that seems like
On
exactly
occasion.
where.
So every use of force will be entered by the supervisor, so it's the officer's responsibility if the supervisor isn't on scene to contact their supervisor to come to the scene and take the report. And they would interview all the parties involved, witnesses and whatnot. They go back, they enter it in a blue team, and that gets routed to their chain of command, so it goes to IA, it goes to their lieutenant, their captain. Everybody gets a look at it. They weigh in as to whether or not they have any concerns about it. It also gets routed to our defensive tactics instructor, or supervisor, so that they can go, are there any training points here? If we determine that we we might have wanted to employ de-escalation versus using force, we would have that conversation. Some of these use of forces could even become an allegation of misconduct if it was significant enough.
The second question I had was, have we been sued? How often are we sued for use of force?
Well, it does happen.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it absolutely has happened. But I wouldn't say it's often. If you look at how many reportable uses of force that we have, it's really not very often, but it absolutely does happen from time to time.
And how many of those have been sustained?
Very few use of forces that are investigated as an allegation of misconduct or are sustained, but occasionally they are.
We've had a few. I think if you want, we can probably look into that and build a little matrix and get back to you, because actually I would like to see the numbers over the years too. So
Yeah.
I made a note here to, and Jeremy can poke us too, to look at our risks that we can speak about and tabulate.
Absolutely.
Taser deployment. Use has increased by 21 from 47 to 68. And I want to say too that I think this is partially because more officers are carrying them. All of our officers now, when they come on, are trained and issued tasers, whereas 4 years ago, we didn't have everybody have tasers. It was those who wanted them and those that we had enough tasers to give to. And I think it was last year before, we were able to purchase enough for everybody. And now it's, I don't even think they get an option anymore. I think it's optional to carry it. They have to have 2 impact weapons or less lethal weapons on their person. But I believe everybody's carrying them that's issued them. So I think the more of them that are out there, the more opportunities they have to be used. And so I think that's that number. Effectiveness decreased from 60 to 54%. And again, I think that's just happenstance. It's not because the weapon itself is ineffective. It's because they didn't get the dart placement right, or they're not penetrating the multiple layers of clothing.
Paper time.
That's up to.
I can rush.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll make up time.
I like the taser verbal only. Those are starting to go up. Well, actually, we didn't have any this year, but
Well, we had a total of 10 and 7 of them were the effective
Right.
version.
so just the mere, if I don't have one, I could go and say, if you don't stop, I'm going to use my taser. And people go, oh, because they do not want to get tasered. They would rather take a dog on than a taser.
Oh.
It's reversed itself.
Well, taser display, would that be unholstering it but not actually firing?
Yes.
Which is almost this,
Yeah.
is a little one step above the
Yeah,
verbal.
so verbal only is, I haven't touched it, I haven't taken it out, I'm going to use it, or I'll tase you. Taser display is removing it, and then obviously the application is using it in some fashion.
It's amazing how effective the display is. It's like 85% or whatever,
Yeah, when you see the little
which is
dot.
awesome. Yeah.
Canines have decreased a little bit. I think partially too, that could be because our canine team has decreased. We did have 4 canines. We were down to 2 for quite a while, and we just got the 3rd one back up, and we'll be deploying him and his dog next week. And again, the criteria for the use of a canine is pretty stringent, and so those criteria have to be met, and the canine handlers are pretty diligent about that. This is just kind of the major categories of force and how they've been deployed over the last 3 years. You can see the taser has increased significantly. The physical control holds and whatnot are lower, although the focus blows are right back up there. And OC spray has stayed pretty constant. It's not used a lot. I think people are reverting more to the taser than they are OC spray.
And this slide just shows the 6 most common uses of force. It's not every one. It's not represented here, but
What would be some examples of other uses of force?
pardon me?
What would be some other examples that are not on here?
We have, well, that's a control hold.
Well, there's a long list
There's a
on the
long
next
list.
page.
Yeah.
On the
Oh,
next
okay.
page, there's a long list.
Is it in there? I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you did ask this question. I
Thank you.
can't-
No, good.
I can't think of them.
Arrest data.
So we just use the arrest data to kind of highlight the level of restraint, I guess, that we use in the PD here to get to our percentage. So you can see, actually, our overall arrests have decreased pretty significantly in the last 2 years, from 11,000 in 2015 to almost 10,000. I guess it's not significant. It looks big on the chart.
Yeah.
But there has been a little bit of decrease in arrests, and I'm not sure what the reasoning for that is, other than maybe we're not having that many crimes that need to be arrested.
Yeah, I will tell you what it is without, having been here for 8 weeks.
I
and
was
I'll tell
just
you
gonna
this.
say, I know what it is too.
Yeah, it's because majority of police department arrests nationwide are made out of proactivity. And when you have a department that can't be proactive, do DUI enforcement, go check on warrants, do sex offender roundups, work the problems in the neighborhoods, you don't make the arrests. So I can tell you that that there's a strong probability that the trending downward of arrests is indicative of the lack of unobligated time that these officers have to actually go out and do the community policing things that they need to be doing.
Thanks, Chief. This chart just breaks it down by categories. All arrests where a person was taken into custody and transported to any one of the facilities. So these, the total arrests include citations, whereas this actually shows the physical custodies. And then our use of force as compared to total arrests. Again, this year or last year we had 10,000 arrests and we only used force 230 times, which, do we have the magic number? Is
Yeah.
less than 5%.
I didn't put it, it's in the
In their
full
package.
report,
Okay.
but, yeah, packet.
And we do strive, the national average is under 5% is the target range for that.
Good. Question before we leave the use of force. From my experience on the Civilian Review Board, and then back a little further when I used to do some criminal defense work, I'm looking at these common charges of disorderly conduct, interfering with police, and resisting arrest. And I was curious if we tracked, like, how many of those are charged in the same incident? 'Cause I used to see a lot of that in complaints, and then defense that kind of piling on is what sometimes that's called. Do we have any sense of how many are from the same incident? And then any ideas of how many of these incidents might result from kind of escalating the situation as opposed to taking the path of de-escalation first? Are we thinking about those?
I don't think we have the ability to track what you're asking for, but I know what you're asking for. And
Yeah.
the problem that we have is what gets entered into Blue Team. So oftentimes, the supervisor will come in and they may go to a burglary call where they arrest a burglar, and instead of arresting and putting in the charge, they won't put burglary, they'll put drugs, or they'll put resisting. So we haven't really identified a way to clarify with supervisors what specific charge we want in there, because frankly, I think the DCs or even the resisting or the interfering
Yeah.
are subsequent to why we were really there. And I
Right.
think that's what we want to
Bingo.
track. We want to track
Right.
why you went there and what you made the arrest for, not these ancillary ones and that we've known that for the last couple of
Yes.
years, and we haven't quite figured out
Okay.
how to train that out of our supervisors.
It's in the narrative, though. I mean,
Yeah.
in the narrative of the Blue Team, when the sergeant's telling the story, he or she will do just that. They'll set the stage and tell the chain of command, here's what was going on.
Right.
But, so the data on the Blue Teams is just as good as what the sergeant that's doing the entry lists down for charges.
Thanks.
We could do more training on that with the subjects.
Question, Doug.
I noticed that in the chart of use of force by type, there are some that are pretty ineffective, seems as though. Is that an issue of sample size? We don't have enough instances of impact weapons to really see the the way they actually work? Is it a training issue, or is that just a use of force we shouldn't be using anymore?
Yeah, let me look at the chart you have. I don't have that one in mind. So when you were talking about, which one were you talking about?
Impact weapon and knee strike specifically, 80 and 70% failure rate.
Well, and again, this kind of goes with the officer reporting too about why, was it really ineffective or did they just perceive it to be? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's all the objective or the subjective decision-making of what the person pushes at the button. But I think we use those so infrequently that those are good topics to bring. I would look at this and go, I need our DT team to focus on how to deliver an effective knee strike. If we're at 70% ineffective, then something's not right there. So I would want them to go back to the officer and go, tell us what you did, or even look at the video and go and analyze it and say, what can we do here? Or sometimes it's just a drug-induced person who is not resistive. So I think gathering that data would help us clarify how to move it into either training or to chalk it up with, it just is what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thanks for the comment, though. I mean, that's...
And our DT supervisor gets copied on every individual use of force report. So not just reviewing that particular one and see if there's any lessons, but he's able to evaluate trends too and incorporate that into the training.
Comparisons of use of force complaints commendations over 3 years. Our use of force has trended upwards very slightly. Complaints have trended down slightly, as have the commendations. We average 33 commendations a month, whereas we get about 27 complaints per month. Commendations by source, seems pretty self-explanatory. We get a lot internal, kind of like the same with our allegations. We get a lot of clapping hands and we get a lot of nay-nays. And then email, auditor. Auditor doesn't get a lot of commendations for it.
Just as wrong.
Actually, the last month I've gotten like 2%, so.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Commendation themes are just as they're up there: tactful, compassionate, efficient, helpful. Received a lot of praise on the court team downtown, as well as the parks and whatnot. And then lessons learned, this is what I was talking about, where we take each one of these, whether it be a service complaint or an IA, and we try to figure out what our training points are and how we can either affect our policy or our training or some other aspect internally. Driving was a common theme, but there was improvement. We do our EVOC training, we try to do it twice a year at least, and when we have a significant flood of these things where it's like people aren't using their turn signals and whatnot, we address them as teams in our in-service as well as in our briefings. Performance was another big one. Not responding to email or phone calls. Customer service, basically, people wanting us to employ de-escalation more often. And again, it's mentioning these things at our in-service and with our supervisors. And then customer service and training were also 2 points. I won't keep on. And then the last one, policies and practices that were affected in 2017 either due to IA training tactics or because it was just time for review. We did prisoner transports, vehicle closed, body worn video, the stops, de-escalation was one of the big ones that was trained on. And forcible stops, I think, is still in review, and code of conduct is in the chief's office. So I know that was a lot. Thanks for your patience. Sorry to take up a little extra time.
That's great. Good job.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments before?
and Jeremy will get back with me, and we'll get you that follow-up information as well.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Before we move on to our next topic of the chief's report, I was hoping that everybody would allow a little change to the agenda. Ms. Stiles had come to speak her public comments, and I'd like to allow her to do that since we changed venue. Normally, she's used to coming to the EPD, so if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah,
I'd like to allow her
You
to
bet.
speak, and I'll turn it over to
Thank you, I
Scott.
appreciate that. I was feeling lonely, nobody was there. Thought I better check this. Okay, so hi, I'm Kellyanne Stiles, and I'm a Christian and a mother and a grandmother of victims of sex trafficking, extreme domestic violence, attempt kidnaps to Mexico, and gun violence and child abuse against my grandson. So as many of you know, I try to raise awareness for these victims, and I wanted to personally invite you to attend Saturday at June 23rd at 10 to 2 is the Junction City Police Chief Morris has invited everyone in Lane County to attend sex trafficking training awareness with Michelle Bart, who's in charge of NWKAVE, and the Junction City Seroptimists. And I attended last year for the first one, and it was an amazing presentation, and everyone needs to be trained on it. So I hope that the new police chief will attend. I spoke to your wife, and she said that, Carrie said that you're already very involved in Seattle and that you're aware and everything. So I appreciate that, because that was one of my requests when we were looking for a new police chief. And then also I wanted to say I have some paperwork here regarding someone, complete stranger, who came up behind me and said some threatening things, and when he saw that I had brought up my camera to take pics and video, proceeded to tell me he was going to break me and hurt me badly and stuff. And eventually people came out to help, including a bank security guard and then LTD, and one of them was attacked and stuff. And I was there continuing to video and hoping, because I'm always, asking people to be compassionate for people like my daughter who might be forced to say or do something against the police or other people. But I'm here to compliment the Eugene Police and LTD security, because this individual seemed to not only have mental health problems that were pretty extreme, but somewhere somebody or something had fed him intense anger and information that he decided to go out purposely, it seemed like, to attack innocent people. And was actually yelling and saying he wanted the police, he wanted problems and different things. And then other people tried to start videoing to say that the police and the LTD security were being negative again. And when I explained to some of them, no, they saved my life. They saved me from going to the hospital right now. I have disability fibromyalgia I'm trying to overcome. Some of them stopped with their camera. And then one continued, a couple of them actually, but I just wanted to say thank you. They saved my life. They saved me from injury. And that's important to me, because I want to be healthy enough to help rescue my family and reunite us. And that said, I heard that they might be here in this area, and I'm very concerned with today being the last day of school, that it's harder for my family to be safe and to be kept up. So I'm asking the police to be aware that if anyone tries to have me arrested, you're going to know who's working against me to help my family. And I just now realized that buzzer's on me. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and thank you for offering to allow me to do this since I came in late accidentally. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the chief's report.
Sure.
Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Bill. And thanks to the commission for just being as engaged as they are and coming alongside this police department as we continue to try and identify really kind of where we're at, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. And this commission is a big part of that, and I recognize that. And so I wanted to say thank you for that. During this time, I'd entertain some thoughts about how I can best use this time with you all, whether that's in just a written report or just kind of some kind of a relational interchange on what's going on. And so as we move into the future, don't be bashful about reaching out and letting me know if there's something more formal that you would like, or maybe some area of influence that you'd like me to focus on. I'm happy to do that. But for tonight, I thought I would just kind of give you an update of what's going on in the police department, where I stand after 8 weeks of trying to dig in and see where we're at. As mentioned, from a policy standpoint, the code of conduct policy is with me. I feel like it has been a long process. It has been looked at over and over and over again, and at the end of this day, having it yet again go in front of senior staff did not seem like a lot of sense. It's on my desk. They're my employees. I expect an awful lot out of them, and I think the code of conduct is dangerously close to being adopted, and feel comfortable that we can get that checked off and put that in the win column here pretty soon. I appreciate the comments about earlier about video technology and the role that it plays in 21st century policing and a contemporary law enforcement organization. I'm very, very quick to say that is one strategy of many when it comes to keeping this community safe, whether it's talking about downtown or talking about out in West Eugene or in any neighborhood in this community. It's one strategy of many, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the most important strategy that we have in keeping us all safe is the human resource side of that approach, and the men and women that do an excellent job every day and deeply care about what's going on in this community, and have a sense of being of coming to work and saying, not on my watch. And that's really deeply instilled in this police department and doing that. But I do appreciate those comments. I also recognize that this commission has a role to play as we look at that technology as being an option. And I've engaged council in that dialogue, and we'll be going back to council on June 25th with a very comprehensive downtown update, because I think there's some things that have occurred and things that we're doing that I think nicely tell the story about the direction we're going with trying to address downtown. And a piece of that story will be some data and some more information about video technology. But I recognize that a big part of us being transparent and a just and reliable organization is having a good policy around a pilot project in the use of video technology. And I think that is squarely in the wheelhouse of this group, to be able to review a policy that we would put in front of you for review, and to be able to get to a place where you feel comfortable with. The good news is that Jeremy was very helpful today in recognizing that some of you have worked on a policy like this in the not so distant past. It needs to be updated. The technology has changed. We certainly are not calling them closed circuit TVs anymore. But I think that the bones of the policy are solid. I think the intent behind the policy is still solid and gets us to a place where we can leverage the technology and at least in a pilot situation, and see if it makes a measurable difference for us and our feelings of safety and security. And so I would encourage some effort around refreshing that policy, getting it up to date so that it's a policy that mirrors the technology of today and the types of technologies that we're looking at, and get it some exposure to this group again, so that we can take a look and see if it's something that we think is a good document to help govern the use of the technology. So I'll look forward to that opportunity to have that discussion. I don't know how quickly that gets spun up in a situation like this. I know we have another meeting in July 12th of the commission. I certainly would be encouraged if we were having that discussion by then, because I feel like as we've had conversations about safety and security, and specifically downtown, is that there's a lot of discussion going on. I was just talking to chair and co-chair here about I like to execute. I like to get going where we can execute some things, and I'm at a place where I really want to execute some strong strategies downtown and see if we can start trending in the right direction when it comes to a feeling of safety and security down there. So With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but things are going very, very well. You've got a great police department with a ton of talent that is being spread way too thin, as you know. But even in spite of that, and that's both police department and dispatch center, I might add. But in spite of that, they show up every single day, and they do their very, very best. And I think that's something for all of us to be very, very proud of. And I think it's this commission can be very proud of what they have contributed to in the building of this organization. So
I'll start a queue for questions, and I have Sean in it to begin with. But before we go into questions, I just, from what the chief said about, we have a policy that we worked on, I think in 2014, to do a pilot project of putting cameras in downtown. What I'd like to see is maybe a motion that says that we could review that policy at our next monthly meeting, so that this process can get restarted and do that. So that'd be great.
So moved.
Second.
That way, first and second, any other discussion on review of that policy? If not, I will take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say aye. Perfect. Good, thank you. Now we'll go to questions. Sean?
So my question is pretty specific about downtown safety. I've met with, in my regular job is radio advertising, so I've met with a bunch of businesses downtown, and by and far, what I hear is the biggest issue is, bathroom security. I think this would dovetail nicely with a, more civic side of it, but what are the challenges surrounding public restrooms, particularly near Whitebird?
that's a good question that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer with a specific answer as specific as your question was. I think part of my concern with downtown is that balance between providing an area for people to use the restroom so that they don't use other areas to use the restroom, but also it provides a level of unsupervised space where all sorts of other activity occurs as well. And so, it goes to the notion, and I'm not sure where you fall on kind of the supervised restrooms, that we have in the park. I'm not sure exactly what we call those, but the restrooms that we're providing in the park blocks that are supervised, there's kind of a park host there that supervises the ingress and egress, and there's kind of a sense of accountability when it comes to using the restroom. You're in there to use the restroom, and you use the restroom. But part of what we're trying to accomplish in downtown is, especially in our open public space, is to not give people the sense that you want to or should have the ability to kind of be in the shadows, so that you can engage in illicit behavior, because that's kind of what we're seeing going on down there is being there, and we can't be everywhere. The eyes and ears, the EPD and the red caps and the downtown ambassadors and the park hosts, they just can't be everywhere. And so I'm not sure that I can specifically speak to public restrooms downtown. The majority of what we're focused on downtown is the criminal behavior that we're seeing, and specifically in the LTD block and in Kesey Square is really, really getting to a place that we're at a tipping point. And I feel strongly that we need to do something to kind of take that back on behalf of the citizens of Eugene.
Can I add a little bit of information? So I don't know when these concerns were raised, and yesterday. So we are adding restroom attendants to I think the parkade. So we're closing the built-in restroom, which for me I call the women's restroom, the rape trap restroom. So we're closing those and setting up another robust portable restroom that will be accessed with a key and have a host in addition to the park host who gives access to. So I don't know if that's started yet, and I don't know if it'll alleviate those concerns, but that's one of the strategies that the city managers has implemented, which isn't necessarily under Chief Skinner's hat, but is part of the whole strategy to try and improve the atmosphere downtown.
The specific concern that was brought to me is around the corner of 12th and High Street at the Whitebird Clinic.
That's not considered downtown.
Okay.
That's why. I heard you say Whitebird, and I was like,
Yeah. One of the property managers has trouble renting because, there aren't.
yeah, so there wouldn't be public restrooms provided there. There's no park. There's not a downtown plaza. So that is out of the downtown core. So that's not actually even being. That's not part of the strategies that I was speaking to. Unfortunately.
Marty?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that. I hope the city, maybe we could recommend to the city manager that there is a fairly robust study of ways to reduce street harassment. The complaints we've been getting largely, but not exclusively, been from women. And I would say that my downtown experience as a 6-foot-tall man is probably very different than other people's. And so I don't necessarily see that as a police initiative, but it is certainly a city initiative that we should look at. And I would say specifically on the issue of Whitebird, they're actually in the process of buying my building, and so there is a desire. They are cognizant of the problem and trying to relocate some of their services to other locations to reduce the concentration of problematic behavior in that area. So.
The challenge that we've had is when we talk about legislating behavior. For a police department, we legislate criminal behavior. And a lot of the behavior that we see that is really problematic is not unlawful. Unless it's behavior that is purposefully intended to incite a violent response from somebody. And then it's harassment. And then we can be involved. But it's the constant conversations I have as well with mostly female. I had a great meeting with Brittany Quick Warner, who is tired, when she's dressed very professionally, tired of being downtown and having things yelled at her about her legs and everything else. And it's that type of behavior that people really want to see wants the police department to do something about, and it's difficult for us to legislate that kind of behavior. But I did have a good conversation at the Young Professional Summit Tuesday, where we talked about, as a society, how do we take our downtown back? How do we have the personal courage to say something and say that's not okay, But have good discernment about that. You don't want to get into a situation where you escalate something. But how many people, when I asked how many people see that behavior and just walk on by and say nothing, or cross the street to go to the other side and not, because you don't want to be on that side of the street. So we as a community have, in a sense, not held each other accountable for the types of the behavior we want to do. And really the only way you change that behavior is you activate downtown with the right people. You activate it, you get the right people down there that really want to take ownership of downtown. And then what you see is, slowly but surely, those comments are not as welcome, it's not as comfortable for people to say those things, and you start stemming that tide. But I want to be real clear that we need to be careful to not expect this police department to legislate that type of behavior. But the criminal behavior, we absolutely can get our arms around.
Claire.
If I can just add to that, thank you, Chief. That's great. So the other initiative, in addition to the restroom hosts, is Downtown Ambassadors. So they will be. You don't look very reassured by.
No, sorry.
I'm just tired.
No excitement in the eyes.
So they are not law enforcement, but they will coordinate with law enforcement and the other security teams downtown. But they are there to help create, again, a positive environment for folks coming downtown and to help mitigate some of those interactions. And as the chief said, and my hope is, create an environment like they might go hang out on the corner of Broadway and Olive, and some of those folks who are engaging in those really negative behaviors, negative but not illegal activities, may not feel as comfortable hanging around down there and doing that. And so it's a test. We don't know if it'll help, But we're trying to wrap our arms around that and be responsive. And I have had in the emails that we get from folks talking about their experiences, I have had men not necessarily sexually harassed, but definitely harassed pretty aggressively in a way that made them feel really uncomfortable as well. So it is definitely a problem.
So I have Jennifer and Joel in the queue. So Jennifer.
Yeah, so with the cameras, you've mentioned a lot of times about downtown, and you have mentioned how they could be deployed in other areas. I have a specific area in my ward that I think of that might be appropriate, but in your initial recommendation, are you going to put one aside for other areas?
So what I think when I dig into trying to refresh the policy for your review, just to bring it up to date, I'll be interested to see that make sure that it's not a policy that's narrowly focused to the downtown core. Because to your point, any resource we have, we want it to be deployed based on kind of data that we collect that drives our resource management and or complaints that we're receiving. The other neat thing that we're doing that's not cameras is that we're purchasing with some year-end money is radar trailers or speed trailers to put in neighborhoods that are struggling with those things to slow people down. It was amazing to me that this police department, and they've heard this before, heard this from me before, and I don't mean to be negative, but for a police department of the second largest city in the state of Oregon, that there's certain aspects that we just don't have certain resources that we should have. And so those types of things, but it's complaint based. So it could be data driven through some good crime analysis, or complaint based from downtown and throughout the city. And I see that there's tremendous opportunity year round to identify those things that are going on. And I use the holiday shopping season as a great example, is that, large retailers struggle during the holiday shopping season with car prowls because people leave their presents in their cars. It's a great way to put that in the parking lot and deter those crimes. Or anywhere where we're having those types of issues, we can do that. So yeah, I think this is one of those programs that would be a pilot program for the city. We may focus on downtown in the early stages of this, but would be certainly a resource we would want to make available citywide.
So I'm thinking of the Coburg Ferry Street Bridge area, I'm sure people, but my concern is that we've gotten to a point where people have stopped complaining because we used to complain and the police would go in and they would clean it up and then they would be right back, and we realized that was a waste of time to complain because it's a waste of police resources when you can't maintain the area. We don't want to waste time with that. So, I mean, is there a way to, maybe there aren't complaints, but there's still a problem? Can we factor that in?
Yeah.
Because I would hate to be calling people, hey, I need you to complain.
No.
So that we can
Yeah, because, and that's where, but the data we're talking about, though, is not only just complaint data from people calling in, but would be calls for service data where we're seeing calls for service. But the piece that sometimes that's left out in a deployment strategy and is undervalued is just the human intelligence piece of where we need to be. Police officers that are working in your neighborhoods know where the problems are.
Right.
And you engage them in discussion and you say, hey, if you had and I could grab them right now and say, if I had a half a dozen cameras, where would you put them? They would take them all of about 3 seconds to tell me we need one here and here and here and here. And so that's a piece of that I think helps bridge that gap. In absence of good hard data, human intelligence is really, really important.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So I have Joel, and we're running a little over, and we have Kyle who's standing by on the phone.
They're all looking for him.
Has he been listening to this whole time?
We haven't dialed him. Yeah, and so I want to kind of move on to that, and we can come back if there's time at the end of the meeting if we have more questions for Chief. But Joel, I'll let you ask your question.
Thank you. This question may be for both of you, but in terms of this, I know we're trying new things out to keep downtown safe. You mentioned this is a pilot project, and we have new strategies for the bathroom. I guess 2 questions. One is, will those folks who are going to be deployed, are any of them going to be bilingual? And 2, are they going to be also looking out for and trained in taking hate and bias incidents or delegating that to or calling the appropriate people?
So, well, good to see you again, by the way. There's probably there's not a strong strategy for any new resources downtown as far as police officers. That we have a downtown team, they're fully staffed, so it's kind of a what you see is what you get from a police officer perspective. There may be some opportunities for some overtime bids to come downtown. The new piece that I'll share with council is us redeploying what we call community service officers down there from a crime prevention standpoint, interfacing with businesses. The majority of any new faces that you see downtown will be as the result of hiring park ambassadors or downtown ambassadors from the city standpoint. That's not under my purview. But the existing downtown team led by Julie Smith, who has been done a fantastic job working hand in glove with Cahoots and doing watching them work and engage people in dialogue to just understand their story before we come to any conclusions about why they're there has been, I really think, a model for how we police with compassion and empathy for people. And she's got some great success stories through the court, through community court and the court program on recidivism. And so we're excited about the base we have, Joel. As we march down a path of maybe expanding a downtown presence, and I certainly have some ideas on that, that'll be key that we have a downtown team that reflects the types of people we're trying to serve downtown, and so that'll be a priority for us.
And I do not know the details on what their training and qualifications would be. We did ask for their job descriptions, and I can see if I have that electronically and give you an answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So we will move on, if everybody's okay with that, to the drone program, and we'll get Sergeant Williams on the phone, and Officer Fritz, if you want to join us at the table, that would be great. You want to bring your fun stuff?
Oh, sure. You want me to move it? Go for it.
Volunteers, keep the overtime down.
Sergeant Williams?
Hello, sir.
Commission is ready for you, and the drones are currently being set up on the table as requested.
Perfect. Awesome. Good evening, everybody.
You brought us toys. Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, I guess it's a little earlier there. Hey, thanks for accommodating. We had an opportunity kind of at the last minute for my wife to come see her brothers and nieces and nephews, and we jumped on it. So that's why we had this change of pace. I appreciate you accommodating the phone call instead of me being there to be able to talk to you. But definitely wanted to get some information out to you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So, Director James signed our pilot program that you guys were instrumental in helping design the policy for on April 23rd to run from 2018 to 2019. April 23rd to April 23rd. And so that really launched us to be able to really start moving down the road. We still have a few roadblocks that we're working through. But as you can see, we recently were able to identify funds to purchase 2 machines, and I'll talk about those here in a few minutes. In the meantime, at about the same time that we were getting ready to implement the program, a cross-departmental work group was formed from a kind of a manager level and a subject matter expert from each city department to work on a unified approach to drone technology implementation across the city. And so I wound up being pulled in to be a part of that work group. And over the last couple of months, a smaller sub-work group of gentlemen from Public Works Parks, a guy by the name of Paul Gordon, and 2 fire personnel Chris Heppel, and Marcus Lay. And the four of us have met numerous times, and we drafted up a city policy document to approve the use of drones citywide with caveats. But a couple of those being that each city policy takes in or adopts a unified operations manual, states that there are a number of different specific areas that each policy manual must address, such as privacy concerns, when and how they can be used for that agency, the adoption of the unified operations manual, and a handful of other things. Training requirements, I think, was in there. I should have brought that document with me. I didn't. But it's a kind of a 30,000 foot level document, and so it really doesn't get into the weeds because all the departments are different. But it does put some checks and balances to ensure that each of the city policy or each of the specific department policies cover areas that we felt were important to be covered. And then it makes a pretty strong privacy statement because that's one thing that we all can agree on is a pretty significant concern of the public. We recently met with that cross-departmental group, and that policy document was approved to be moved forward to the execs. And then we finalized some last touches on what's turned into a pretty comprehensive operations manual. And again, that'll be a manual that everybody will work off of. And the goal with that is to ensure that in the event of an emergency or equipment issues, that any drone operator within the city from any department will have hopefully trained together and will operate under the same guidelines. And so we're all doing the same thing for consistency. A third piece of that work group came what we've titled the DAC, which is the Drone Advisory Committee. And this is it's kind of a subset of this cross-departmental group, but it's what that's going to live on as into the future. And that is a group that essentially, if the city manager or if anybody specifically had a generalized city drone-related issue, that issue would come to the DAC, and then the issue would be worked through and responded to by the DAC. If we have any incidents that we need to report to the FAA, once we figure out how the city wants to move forward with certificates of authorizations or waivers to allow for additional flight authorizations, like flying at night and flying over crowds and flying in foul weather, the DAC will kind of work through some of those issues. And then annually, the operations manual will be reviewed by the DAC to ensure that it's up to date and that there aren't any changes that need to be made. We anticipate that over the course of the next year or two, as this actually rolls out and we see how things work in practical application, that there's certainly going to be some adjustments to what that looks like. So it creates a pretty good layer, I think, of all the departments working together and being accountable to each other, which I think will help. Hopefully will smooth some of the concerns about police having the technology, because we're not just moving along by ourselves. And we have pretty good support within that group moving through this process. So at this point, Sarah Maderi has been leading that group. She's the Public Works Director currently, and she has been meeting with individual execs and kind of giving them a brief on where we're at with things. And there isn't a timeline for when that official presentation and I don't know, vote, so to speak, is going to take place. She did tell me today that she thinks that I can tell you it will be soon. So I'm hoping it will be soon. In the meantime, we're working under an administrative order from last June that requires 2 of 3 people to authorize non-emergency missions and the city attorney to authorize emergency missions for anyone other than fire. And so we have blanket authorization for training flights out at the Short Mountain Range, which is where we do our bomb team does training, and we'll take suspicious devices to dispose of them. And then there's several bays for firearms training for a number of local agencies. So we've been going out there we've gone out a few times already to fly and to get familiar with the equipment that we've got. And we were authorized. We did one fairly quick mapping mission where we mapped out the Owen Rose Garden following a felony domestic violence case, and it worked great. So, any questions about any of that? Okay.
No questions, Kyle.
Perfect. And I figured I'd probably just talk for 10 to 15 minutes at most, and then I'll let you guys look at the machines and we can kind of talk about them more specifically. In the meantime, right now I'm having communications with our explosives team, the SWAT team, and the Canine team. While the pilot program doesn't allow us to, under very many circumstances, to be able to do any particular missions with them, the kind of training to make sure that we're on the same page to be able to do that down the road or in the event of something catastrophic. We want to be on the front end of that, so we're working on getting some training set up to start having some familiarity there. July 18th, we'll be working with the SWAT team. EDU has a few things going on already, and so we're kind of waiting to see where their schedule shakes out. We've also been working with Lieutenant Klinko and I went over to Bend PD, where they've got a fairly robust program that launched last fall, and then they are having a SWAT Canine training day on Tuesday, and our two pilots are going to go over and train with them that day, and so they'll be able to come back and learn a lot. The Bend folks are pretty well squared away with where they're at this point. We did run a process, and Officer Fritz there, who's set up the equipment, and Detective Ben Hall were selected to be our two pilots. They both very rapidly jumped on the online resources, studied up, and both passed their Part 107 exams in a very quick, short turnaround time frame, and are just waiting on their permanent license cards. And so we are pretty close to being able to be operational. Once we have full authorization from the city manager and the execs to fully implement the pilot program, we're going to be pretty well ready to go, at least on simpler missions while we continue to expand our skills. Another opportunity that we have was I got connected with the Portland area work group, a sergeant with the Portland Police Bureau who heads up their air unit. Has been kind of collecting names and putting together a pool of folks up in that area that either have programs or want to have programs. And they are doing a stand-down training day on September 12th, I believe it is. It's the 12th or the 18th. And they're trying to gather as many agencies from around the state to kind of get everybody again on board to be moving in the same direction and doing what we can to make sure that we're all trying to support the mission of bringing the technology to law enforcement. So that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what all the other agencies up there are doing. He, at least earlier this year, had intended to kind of have quarterly get-togethers, trainings, in order to build in even just practical training opportunities to be able to help each other out. And so it'll be interesting to see what that comes to. And I'm excited about what that might look like. So we're doing a lot to try to connect with our other partners. I reached out to LCSO, Lane County Sheriff's Office, and they're a little bit behind. But we need to reconnect with them and see what we can do to see if there's anything we can do to help them out as well, to kind of get them up to speed and support them along as we're a little bit further ahead. So I think that's most of the business end of kind of where we're at. It's a little bit of a sit and wait with a hustle up to get these documents put together and the designing of the Drone Advisory Committee, the operations manual, completing that, and then the policy document were certainly some pretty heavy lifts that got done pretty darn quick, all things considered. So, and those are mostly out of our hands at this point. So the two machines that we purchased, one of them, the Mavic Pro Platinum, is really similar to the one my personal one that I passed around the meeting a few months ago. Only it's a little bit quieter, and they improved something in it, and they figured out how to squeak out a few more minutes of flight time with it. It also pairs really nicely with the goggles, and the goggles are pretty neat because even on a full daylight, full bright day, the goggles kind of come down to make like blocks out all the sun, and so you're able to see all the color and all the detail. The screens that you use to fly the drones with actually they get washed out pretty good in the sun, and so it can be kind of hard to see details. And so the goggles, and Ben has found, and us too in training, the goggles give you a pretty remarkable perspective. The other thing that's amazing about them is that once you pair them, you can authorize the goggles to have control of the gimbal, which is what the camera is mounted to. And so if you want to look up, you just move your head like you're looking up, and it'll actually automatically pan the camera up for you. Then down, left, right. So you can just stand there and actually just be searching, looking around, and the camera will look where you're looking. It's a pretty remarkable experience when somebody else is flying you around in the sky and you're looking around as if you're literally in an airplane looking down at the ground. It's pretty amazing. The camera on that one is a 12 megapixel and it records 4K video, so pretty high resolution video at 30 frames a second. The big white one is a pretty similar setup in that it really is just a camera. You can't swap the camera out for anything else. There's no additional functionality with that one, but it is a pretty significantly higher resolution camera, and so it's a 20 megapixel. It gets much richer, deeper colors, and will record 4K at 60 frames a second, which is enough to give you high definition, low or slow motion in HD, and it's a pretty remarkable camera. So the intent is to use the Phantom 4 Pro, which is the white machine, for all of our evidence collection type jobs, and the Mavic is more of a quick deploy. If we're looking for somebody in the river or a walk away, or we've got a mission where we are actually helping the Canine search for somebody, and we're really just looking and searching, where the Mavic and the goggles are a better combination for that. So while they are pretty similar, they do kind of have different purposes and different missions. And then the next level up is what, as long as everything continues to go as planned, is what we'll be hoping to get, and that will allow for different cameras to be attached. A zoom camera, FLIR camera that can see heat signature, heat temperatures, which are really, really good for locating people. And just some different options. Those they're making lights that you can attach to them. I saw an attachment for a bullhorn on another one. So the potential for rather than having to drive an armored vehicle or a car up in front of a house to try to loud hail to someone who's not responding, the ability to land a small machine in the front lawn or on the front porch and be able to have a loudspeaker is a reality that's coming, and certainly I would think a lot less intimidating than having a police vehicle driving up in the front. There's a lot of potential technology coming out that's pretty exciting. That has the potential of attaching to these things, but we just kind of need to keep slow rolling our way through. We're trying to be a squeaky wheel to keep things moving, but not so squeaky that it clogs us up or that we have any problems. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Anybody with questions? Sean?
I did have one question, and that's more for you, I believe.
Sure.
Have you experienced any sort of, nausea or anything like that after prolonged use?
I personally have not. Cool. So I've played with the goggles and trained with them 2 or 3 different times, and I've worn them for half an hour at a time. We get about a half hour of solid flight time and no issue.
Yeah. So yeah, the goggles will certainly cause motion sickness, and if you're prone to motion sickness, there's a good chance that you'll get sick wearing them. If you're not prone to motion sickness, it really shouldn't be a problem. What I've read and found to be true is that it helps if you sit or lean up against a solid object. And what Ben found, they have one team of 2 officers in particular who work a shift that have had a lot more activity than some of the others, and they have found a really good pairing where one of the officers is just the pilot and one wears the goggles, and one gets motion sick and one doesn't. And you can imagine who's in which role there.
Yeah.
And yet they've found it to be really, really helpful to actually just settle into those two roles because they work as a pair really well now, can communicate about what they want. And so it seems to have worked well that way. It really is with the goggles something where you need to have two people and realistically a third to just be a lookout for them because you got your pilot staring at the screen and then you got somebody wearing goggles. The nice thing about the goggles is that there's no special skills required, and so that's where I picture our bomb stuff happening, where we can put the goggles on any bomb tech and have them pair them up with a pilot, and they can do a fly around or inspect a package, and the bomb tech can be looking and watching and seeing what's going on in really clear picture, and the pilot can be flying doing what they know how to do, and so that is a nice part about it, is that it doesn't necessarily take two drone team operators or pilots to be doing those. We can put those on whoever makes the most sense or whoever's available to be the eyes that are out there. So.
Anybody have any other questions, comments?
No.
Joel?
You guys having fun?
I might admit that we might have stood out there and looked at each other and said, we're actually getting paid for this right now. I mean, it's all training.
So, hi, Sergeant Williams. This is Counselor Syret. So I'm just chuckling a little bit because I know when you brought us your personal one and we were talking about this whole project, and if we purchase these going forward and made them a permanent part of our equipment, we were going to boldly brand them with EPD. But one of these is so small that nobody's going to be able to see any branding on this thing when it's flying around. So I just a random comment.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and there have been a lot of discussions about that. That's one of the things that the cross-departmental group has talked about quite a bit, and they will all need to be branded. There's an agreement amongst everybody that they all need to be branded at City of Eugene, and these two machines that we have purchased are going to be harder to make identifiable. We literally actually just got them about, maybe 3 weeks ago. And so I am still intrigued by looking for ways that we can mark them. The Matrice 210, which is the one that you can swap cameras on. It's a much bigger machine that can have more options. And there is actually a company that makes a red and blue LED flashing light that attaches to the bottom of it and plugs in, and would be much more identifiable. And so there are some options. There just aren't as many for those two, and we're sensitive to trying to figure out how to do that. But you're absolutely right. And when that thing's 400 feet in the air or 350 feet in the air, it is going to be difficult unless you've got really good binoculars to be able to see that it's police or City of Eugene. But if you find one in your backyard, we'll certainly make it very clear. We just haven't quite gotten there yet.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. It'll be a challenge to try to accommodate that in some way that's meaningful.
Okay, great. Anything else from anybody? Well, thank you, Sergeant Williams. Thank you, Officer Fritz, for your time and for showing us this.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure. Thanks for accommodating the phone call, and hopefully you'll be able to have a minute or two, or you have been able to be looking at what those are and how they look, and hopefully in the not too distant future we'll be able to actually give you a demo and let you try on the goggles and have a little more practical application of it. So
we look forward to that part.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Now, I thought you were going to fly them around.
So we're running a little behind, so we'll quickly move along to the Police Commission Work Plan and Annual Report. And I'm going to turn that over to Scott since he was here last meeting and kind of put together that piece.
Great, so we have an annual requirement to submit a report to the city council, and so in your packet on, I believe, page 32, a copy of that document is there that we'll need to make a motion to get approved to send to them in July. Just highlighting some things, there are 23 items on the work plan. We've touched on 22 and completed 8. It's a 2-year work plan, so we've touched on all but 1. That's good. And completed 8. I'm excited about that. In the write-up, you'll see there's really 4 areas that we're working on. One is highlighting the policy reviews that we've had over the last year, and then the others are 2 areas around communication, and that's both with the public and increasing our outreach, and then second, within our charter with the city manager's office, city council, and the police chief. So we're working those. We do have quarterly meetings with the now with the city manager. We're working and have our first meeting scheduled with the chief, and we'll continue to work with our city council members as well. And then the final area is kind of an information piece, and that's the study that was done last year of really identifying the problem areas with the service that the police department's being able to respond to. And I think that there's opportunities in the next year that, just like tonight where we made a motion and approved to add something to the work plan, there may be opportunities in the near future as we work towards solutions. And those solutions probably look like the time frame of fall and December area. And then I'm hesitant to say solutions, but at least movement toward, or a phase movement towards the end state of, as the chief identifies, his priorities in the city. So because we're short on time, we usually have a habit of going around the table. I'm going to just ask for any discussion items by exception. And you see something in the work plan that you have questions on or disagree with, that we need to have a conversation to update or modify before sending to the city council.
That's great.
Move to approve the annual report.
Second.
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
See what happens when you
One area that we identified in our working group, though, is next year, we probably want to have this document complete sometime around April, in that time frame. And the reason for that is this is due to the city council in July, and the presentation usually is several months afterwards, which would be September, October. With elections, it might be awkward to brief a plan that you weren't leading or weren't active in the drafting of the document. So having the timing of the document so that those going forward would have enough time to review it and understand what they're going to be presenting. So we'll be looking at advancing that timeline next year.
Thanks, Scott. So our next item is the election of the chair and vice chair for next year. Jeremy had put a memorandum in the package for you to look at. And so the process, what it will be, is that we'll look for nominations for both chairman and vice chairman. And then once the nominations are completed, then Jeremy will pass out ballots that everybody can write their pick on the ballot, and then he will tally them. And he will not read who's voted for who, but he will then just tally them and keep them as our general record for if anybody wants to see if he counted right in the future. We can do that. So, okay.
What?
With that, I will open it up for nominations.
Point of information. For how long have you guys been in?
This is my second year. First year.
Okay.
I would just throw out there that since there are some newer people on the commission, if you two would be willing, I would nominate, just for continuity purposes, the same slate for this next year. So Bill is chair and Scott is vice chair.
I'll second.
I think that makes sense, yeah.
We have a first and second for that nomination. Any other nominations?
Looks like
Do you want to nominate anybody?
Are you feeling railroaded?
Pass out the ballot.
So Jeremy will now pass out and handle his part.
Okay.
I had these beautiful.
Kind of moved now, right?
Cards.
To do this by acclamation.
Can we do
Special
vote?
vote?
Yeah, can we
I
move
see
to
you're
approve by
okay
acclamation?
It's kind of moot.
So,
Well, he didn't change he could have nominated
Yeah, that's
somebody
true.
else.
I have been nominated for things without being
Jeremy,
asked,
I'm hearing
so.
a request to
It's unanimous, but.
do the vote by acclamation. Is there an objection to that?
No objection.
I'm
This
asking
is
the chair.
I don't
just
have an
pro
objection. I
forma.
just always want to make sure.
Save
the trees.
Save the trees.
You don't have any
Sorry,
objection
Jeremy.
to doing the
Sorry,
same.
you worked hard. Maybe next year. You worked
We
hard.
appreciate
Thank you,
that.
you two.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
That's awesome. You guys done a great job, by the way. So.
thank you.
I guess formally I'll second the motion for approval by acclamation. We have to vote on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a first and second. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Pass. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Boom, boom.
That was easy.
Good job, Steve.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next is a community outreach update. Scott, I will turn that over to you.
So we are tracking and we're moving toward that 100% goal. So has anyone made any contacts or had any visitations with any associations in the last couple of weeks of this month or intend to over the next couple of weeks?
I've been in contact with the new Bethel community folks.
Oh, that's great.
Just because I know the guy who's putting it together. So I plan on going to one of their meetings. He asked me to go at some point. I'm not sure when he wants me there yet.
If you send in an email, somebody might be able to accompany you when you figure that out.
That'd be awesome.
I would be happy to go if I'm available, but.
And I might just mention, Bethel is going through a challenging time with the new teen boys shelter that's planning on going in their neighborhood. I attended a meeting with them last Wednesday night. There's one going on right now. It's probably over by now, but I couldn't attend tonight because I was here with you guys. But it is a very contentious subject for that neighborhood, and so you may get drawn into that as a police commission member, and it'll be important probably for you to help them understand, what your role is. But
yeah, I was as a private citizen already in contact with them about that.
Yeah.
Knocking doors, letting folks know.
Right. So we're fully engaged in that. I'm not sure what role we'll play, but I've been staying close to that just to give them a sense of feeling like they're being heard with some of their concerns about safety or their perceived concerns about safety issues with that. So.
I'll be attending the ACLU's We the People conference in a professional capacity through my day job, but I attend stuff like this pretty often, so if I find anything interesting or relevant, I'll be sure to bring it back to you all.
And Joel, I would just encourage you, if there's ever anything that looks like maybe you and I can go to together, I'm happy to just be your plus one and just let you do your thing and just be there. I think it's an important nonverbal message that we're shoulder to shoulder regardless of what we have to say together. So
sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Joel, Scott has put together and working on a spreadsheet so that we can track. So we'd like to be able to show in our annual reports to the council that we are doing this outreach and which groups we're outreaching. So if you could make sure that information gets tracked into either Jeremy or to Scott, that would be great.
Sounds good.
So, Jennifer?
Yeah, summer is kind of a downtime for a lot of these neighborhood groups and community groups. So I'm wondering if in fall, if we could touch back with that list and where we need to make some more efforts, that might be helpful.
So, and just encourage everyone to get involved because as our new chief is implementing different resources that are become available. We need the public's comments and to be able to understand, and that serves this commission to be in a better place to offer advisory, word of mouth, what have you, to the council, to the city manager as we move forward.
Yeah.
I think that's to our relevancy as a commission.
I appreciate that comment because the community we will be as a city engaging in some polling that will happen probably later this month into early July, and then again another round of polling, trying to get our arms kind of wrapped around what community justice looks like for the city of Eugene. And so that outreach will work nicely with kind of the timing of the polling. It gives us a sense of how to build a police department that meets the community needs, as opposed to what some agencies do, which is build a police department and tell the community to conform to us. We're certainly wanting to do it the other way.
Claire?
So this isn't about specific engagement out in the community, but I did try to generate some public comment for us here tonight on our Monday evening city council meeting. So maybe it's a testament to how few people are watching the city council meeting at 9 o'clock at night. But the chief came and shared gave an opportunity for council to give him feedback around this pilot project of the mobile cameras. And I, made a big pitch to folks that, I warned the chief that there would be folks who'd want to give input on that idea and encourage folks to come to our meeting tonight. And he was even, more informed than I was that we were meeting here and not at the police department. So didn't get too many reactions from that, but just want to let you know I have tried to let people know that we exist and they can come and speak to us. So.
Good.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I could save this for the closing round, but I did look at our budget committee documents where they provided us with the job descriptions for both the park ambassadors and the downtown ambassadors, and neither one had required or preferred qualifications for bilingual, although perhaps in the job posting they did, and they did not make any reference to being able to recognize hate and bias crimes and refer to those to the Human Rights Commission. So I will send the city manager a note or give him a call and ask him to make sure that that gets pulled through in terms of training.
Yes.
Good. Anything else, Scott?
Not on outreach. Thank you.
All right. So we actually might end early. We cut back up. So we'll go to closing comments. And Scott, would you like to start us off, and we'll go around this way?
Sure. I just wanted to say that for those of you that maybe weren't aware of the last budget committee meeting, we did allocate some more resources for the police department. It's I wouldn't even call it a Band-Aid, but it's a little bit more than what's been done in the past, and so the expectation that this is a solution shouldn't be out there. This is just a step in the right direction, and I hope that the chief and the police department look at that as a solid footing moving forward, that the community's behind their efforts and what they're doing. So I know we had discussion at the last meeting around the budget committee, and so I wanted to just make sure you were aware of that.
Yeah, just thank you for that, Scott. We, the police department, have had an opportunity to message to them that very thing. They're very encouraged by the amount of support that they're receiving from council, first and foremost, the budget committee as a group, to include those 16 individuals plus the mayor. And so we are embarking on kind of a comprehensive strategy on those funds. We will have those funds set aside and actually have a separate accounting of how we're spending those one-time dollars, so that we can come back and talk a little bit about what we were able to use that for. And it is going to be a very comprehensive approach to include some staff time, technology, hopefully some programmatic things and continued programmatic contracts, recruitment efforts, and so we're really trying to be very, very thoughtful about how we spend that money and trying to improve what's happening kind of in our public safety system. So thank you for that.
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add.
Marty?
I'm running for office to replace the chair of the State Revenue Committee, so revenue has dominated my life for the last few months. I guess I would say what I've taken away in terms of capstone thoughts, what voters in Oregon like is when you know what you need to buy, that you take time to educate people about why you need it, that you work with stakeholders to identify the source of the revenue, and build consensus around that as well, and only then do you act on it. And if it gets referred, at that point, if you built consensus around it, then people tend to defend it. Sometimes we either assume revenue should be simple and easy, or assume that it's impossible. And the truth is somewhere in the middle, which is it is a process, and you can't short circuit it. You have to kind of commit to it and say, this is what we need to do. Start early doing it. So I certainly think we've gotten to the point. I think there's a broad recognition that the limits we put on the growth of city revenues don't keep up with the demand for services by the city. What to do about it is the question. So, and that's kind of the process you have to go through. And if we're going to do it, we should do it right. Take the time to do it. That's all I have. Thanks.
John?
I am very glad to meet here. It was like one extra person, but that's 150% of what we usually do. That's really my only comment.
Thank you. Joel?
I've talked briefly with Chris Skinner about this, and I don't know if this is an appropriate time to bring it up, and especially since I don't know how much we're able to do in terms of some statewide policies or initiative petitions and stuff like that. But I wanted to bring to the attention of the Police Commission that there is an upcoming initiative petition that may qualify that would repeal Oregon's 30-year-old sanctuary law. So I think it's certainly something that if we are able to have a conversation about it, we should have a conversation about it and how it would affect Eugene residents.
Clark?
Yeah, so thank you, Joel, for mentioning that. City Council had a update yesterday on the data that we collect and why and wherefore around city departments, a really high level kind of review that was prompted by the Human Rights Commission request that we expand our protections and limit our data collection so that we are not in a position of having to turn it over to anybody. And I'm going to put in a council work session poll on that topic to try to look at our ordinance language around strengthening, not just for how our law enforcement operates, but the city as a whole in terms of enhancing those protections. And those are recommendations that have come directly from the Human Rights Commission. And then I just wanted to share an email we got on Monday from a downtown business owner who's stayed in touch with us about the challenges downtown over the last couple of years. This is Susan Costa, who owns Mosaic Fair Trade Coalition, and she wrote, "I own a store downtown and I want to thank you," directed at Mayor and City Council, "and I want to thank you for the improvements you are making downtown. The dog license ordinance and the police patrols are having a very positive effect on our safety, and the whole atmosphere downtown seems nicer. I look forward to getting the mobile cameras and planter boxes. I think they will help too. Now I hope the residents of downtown will feel better about coming here so our businesses can be successful. Keep up the good efforts." So I just wanted to share some of that feedback.
Thank you. Steve?
I'd say this was a really great meeting, lots of good participation and really great comments, so thank everybody. I would say I just want to have this as a takeaway that kind of a reoccurring theme here was about data and metrics and measures. So I want to put another plug in there. It's good to think of those things in whatever form they might need to be. And for many aspects what we do, from personnel to policing goals, it's good to know, have some idea of what we want to accomplish and whether we're getting there or not. And you do that through data and measures and metrics. So, that's all I have. Thanks.
Jennifer?
I guess I don't really have anything, but I want to thank Bill and Scott for being willing to put in another year.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot of work, and we really appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you. So I just want to thank everybody again for tonight. I do want to mention, since we focused a lot on, and what officers do wrong or what complaints are. But I was lucky enough to attend the police department's awards last month, and when you go to that and you see the fabulous work that they're doing, there was a couple standouts. One is sitting at the table with us that got a Class 2 commendation for his work on police legitimacy. Will was up there and got that with his group that did that. That was nice to see. And the other one that really stood out was there was a young officer, I think she's just 1 year, a little over a year, won, I think, 4 awards. And just to see that that's the caliber of officers that we're bringing on, it was fun to see her, and I had a chance to go up and introduce myself to her, and she's very humble about it, which made it even better to see that. So, nice job on the officers there. So thank you, everyone.
Right.
And, we'll have a good night.
All right.
Thank you.